Hi everyone, welcome back to the Mind Game channel. In our last episode, we delved into the story of Evernight and the Garden of Recollection in Honkai Star Rail. Today, we're building on that foundation to discuss the other two critical components of the Path of Remembrance in Emporius, Cyrene and Fuli. Unless you're already familiar with Buddhist philosophy, specifically the Yogachara school, I strongly recommend watching the Evernight video first. It serves as a primer for this discussion. I assume most of you have seen that video where I already gave spoiler warnings, but for those little rebels that just have to start with this one, this video contains major spoilers for the entire Amphoreus arc up to 3.7, especially regarding Cyrene. After the intro, it will be all fair game, alright? So, if you're ready, let's take a closer look at this romantic story like none has come before. But before that, the Herta space station is a place of erudition. Since we're talking about the culmination of remembrance today, what do you say we change the scenery? Now this is a much better vibe to tell the story about remembrance. I can't find a screen here, so I borrowed this magical book. Anyway, this time let's start by untangling the plot. The narrative of Amphoreus is complicated because it plays with the concept of nested cycles. It actually has cycles within cycles within cycles. Characters who look identical might not be the same individual, whereas characters who look completely different might just be the same person at different stages. For the sake of clarity, let's trace the character we call Cyrene through the internal chronological flow of Amphoreus. Initially, she was Philia 093, one of the 12 factors placed into the Amphoreus experiment by Lygus. Each factor was assigned a specific primum mobile, meaning a primal drive, in order to simulate a path. Her drive was lament, simulating the path of remembrance. Throughout more than 30 million cycles of eternal recurrence, she recounted the story of each cycle to the seed of memory at the end of every loop. Over time, this caused the seed to grow into a bud of memory and eventually blooming as the flower of memory. The seed of memory is the first new spore, also called the Demiurge, which was to be the culmination of erudition's extrapolation until Lygus attempted to purge it using a Stellaron. After the final battle against Iron Tomb, she chooses to look back at the past to anchor causality, becoming the consciousness of Philia 093, thereby completing her grand cycle. You see, there are so many Cyrenes existing across different points in time, and limited by the crude language of humankind, I have to use specific names like Philia 093, the Seed of Memory, the Flower of Memory, and such to refer to specific instances of her. My initial draft tried to avoid these distinctions to honor Cyrene's own wishes, but it ended up being somewhere between a funny mental exercise and psychopathic lunacy. After all, language is closer to a product of erudition rather than remembrance. However, the risk of this approach is that it makes them feel like independent individuals. So please keep in mind, do not individualize them. Yet, also don't think of them as identical or continuous either. I know it's counterintuitive, we'll get into the details in a moment. Anyway, the core of this whole cycle is Philia 093 telling stories to the seed of memory. I've seen interpretations online suggesting this corresponds to the training of an AI, that the stories are training data. Since Cyrene is the narrator, all stories are told from her subjective perspective, so the resulting AI simulates that subjectivity and becomes Cyrene. To be honest, that was my first impression too. Lygus described Amphoreus as a deep learning program made for the Black Tide. It instantly leads the narrative that way. It even explains how the Flower of Memory could eventually become the consciousness of Philia 093. Because Philia 093 was essentially an electrical signal. The story works that way. Or rather, of course it does. That is how the story of Amphoreus appears through the lens of erudition. But if you shift your perspective to remembrance, things get much more interesting and it links back to our story of Evernight. In the last video, we mentioned the maxim shared by both Evernight and the Garden of Recollection. If a new life is to be born, its seed has to be dead. We also discussed how Evernight returned her body to March 7th because she realized the significance of blankness isn't in being devoid of any color, but in the capacity to carry any and all color. In Evernight's story, we achieve a metaphysical understanding, and in Cyrene's story, we see it put into practice. Cyrene's existence is a continuous cycle of seeds and manifestations, constantly sprouting and perishing. We know that Cyrene is her chosen pen name. It means ripples of past reverie. This is a perfect metaphor.
The final ripple nourished the great tree, and from it grew a single pink peach.
Let's complete that image. There is a great tree that bears a peach. The peach is ripe and falls into the water, creating ripples of waves. If you look closely at the ripples, there are highs and lows. One moment later, the low becomes high and high becomes low. But this isn't just a simple repetitive loop. As the highs and lows alternate, each ripple extends itself across a wider and wider surface. Eventually, the ripples nourish the tree, which bears another peach. It's a perpetual cycle where you can't say which came first, the peach or the ripples. This is the story of Amphoreus. The 30 million cycles of Philia 093 are the ripples constantly spreading outward. This even includes the flower of memory. If you stick a pole in the water and call it the present, then you see the highs and lows of the ripples pass it one by one, like the birth and death of each Cyrene. Your instinct might be to find the original peach in that metaphor that started the ripples. Was it the first Philia 093 who arrived at the great tomb of the Nameless Titan? Or the seed of memory that met Philia 093 for the first time? Or the flower of memory who traveled back to the past? Or is it Mem whose encounter with the Trailblazer made this whole cycle possible? The answer is none of them, and at the same time, all of them. To obsess over this is like looking at a spinning windmill and trying to figure out which blade is the first blade. It's a linguistic trap, the mistake of treating these Cyrenes as individual, independent entities. Because the truth is, there never was a seed of memory trapped in that cage, independent of Philia 093 listening to her stories. From the very beginning, Philia 093 was telling stories to an empty room.
That the Demiurge has been in everyone's plain sight all this time, yet they were mistaken for someone else. That made the most sense. Why was the room empty? Because the person locked in there had run away ages ago. But they were weak and small and had no presence whatsoever. Even the old Intellitron didn't notice them.
The Demiurge wasn't in that tomb. From the start, it had become Philia 093's consciousness. Specifically, the Demiurge is Philia 093's Alaya Vijnana, the 8th consciousness that we talked about in the last episode about Evernight. That is why it's called a seed of memory. Because according to the Yogachara philosophy, the Alaya Vijnana is a warehouse of seeds. Yogachara teaches that manifestation perfumes seeds. Philia 093's nurturing of the seed through the memories of each cycle is precisely that. By using her own gentleness to nurture the seeds of her own consciousness, she herself became the embodiment of that gentleness.
Of course, because the world was gentle to me. So, I grew up to be gentle as well.
But just like you can't say all these Cyrenes are independent individuals, neither can you say they are the same. Each has her own manifestation, in other words, her own story. It is only because they gathered 30 million cycles of stories into As I've Written that the seed of memory could grow. And the reason they could carry 30 million different stories is that they understood the meaning of blankness.
The later memories disappeared? Invisible? Or disappeared? Ah, I got it! Is this a blank space? So, next Cyrene is blank space.
The next Cyrene is blank space. This is the answer Evernight eventually found. The significance of blankness lies in a blank future, not a blank starting point. For every Philia 093 who became a ripple of past reverie, the seed of memory was that blank future. Because of the stories of all the Philia 093s, she gained enough spiritual power to move forward and make a better future. In the beginning, she was weak and small and had no presence whatsoever, so much so that Lygus ignored her. But through these memories, she became a power to be reckoned with. But here is the issue. Where did those memories come from? At the start of every cycle, Philia 093 dies. She couldn't have possibly experienced every single flame chase journey herself.
It's that ceremonial blade.
Now, I can say with certainty, time is the page on which that eon records Amphoreus. If it fades from existence, and all that it records is lost among the stars, that eon will surely direct their gaze here. And it will be a glance that spans time and space, transforming each incarnation of me into the power you shall wield to reset time, imbuing my soul into this ceremonial blade, and creating an endless flame chase journey.
The ceremonial blade killed Cyrene at the start of every recurrence, and at the end of every journey, Cyrene's soul took the extrapolated memories stored within the blade and buried them in this great tomb. That's how the memories of Amphoreus transcended the loop and were continuously stored, while the scepter had to revert its progress over and over again because of loss in its logic.
I think there are two ways to look at this. One is the perspective of erudition. Her soul was hidden in the ceremonial blade, traveling with Final the Flame River through every cycle. Or perhaps as they heard of Amphoreus, she had data access permissions. That's Dan Heng's rational, objective analysis. But there is another explanation that I think fits the Yogachara philosophy of remembrance much better. When I introduced Yogachara in the last video, I started with a question. How do we know life isn't just a grand dream? Yogachara offers radical acceptance to that idea. Therefore, within their philosophical framework, dreams and reality have the same exchange value, because their function is identical to cultivate the seeds within the Alaya Vijnana.
Someone once told the very first me that everything was false. That the only life in Emporius was a great catastrophe, nurtured using the world as a factor. But how could a dream feel so real? That's why I didn't agree with him.
You see, erudition says Amphoreus is a dream. Cyrene says it can't be a dream, it's too real. Because for her, for all intents and purposes, that dream is the reality. In Cyrene's character PV, we see some weird stuff. Cyrene traveling with the express crew through Yarilo 6, the Xianzhou Luofu, and Penacony. But we know she wasn't actually there. While this is open to interpretation, my take is that these memories, even the 30 million records in As I've Written, are just Cyrene's gentle dreams. Gentle dreams that nourished a gentle consciousness. That is why, amidst 30 million cycles of suffering, she could grow into such a gentle person. And that's also why she calls them stories.
Look at these stories I wrote. Every page is full of tenderness and joy. But only the author knows how much struggle and agony lie beyond the pages. But I am no author. I'm a girl who'll never get to grow up. I only tell stories that people like to hear. In them, the world tucks away its scars and smiles for all to see.
Among all these stories, the most essential is the one about the flawless crystal flower. This is the absolute centerpiece of Cyrene's story and a complete allegory for her character arc. The story appears twice in the game, but there are 4 iterations in total, where each carries its unique layer of meaning. Before we dive into the analysis, let's look at the stories themselves. The clips will take quite a bit of time, but I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to understand this metaphor in order to understand Cyrene. So let's revisit them in their entirety. For those that are already confidently familiar with the text and may have spent too many hours pondering about its meaning, feel free to jump to this timestamp on the screen. The first and second versions come from the dialogue between Philia093 and the Flower of Memory.
Once upon a time, there was a flawless crystal flower that sparkled with light, like Peach's every story. How beautiful would the heart of such a brilliant flower be? A little fairy was curious and wanted to know. But it looked and looked, only to find the crystal flower flawless. Round and round they went, seeing only their own reflection. In that case, they should work hard to learn more. So the little fairy came every day to sit next to the crystal flower and think about the answer. Until one day, to their surprise, the crystal flower fell to the ground and shattered. The little fairy was so sad, but they immediately discovered that there was a light among the broken pieces. What could it be? They didn't know. But it was a good light. It was bright, warm, and happy. And I knew it was love. Love brings everything together, and it brought you and me together. So Peach and I will always be together. What a nice fairy tale. I'm giving it to you. Peach likes beautiful things, can write stories, and can tell lovely tales. I hope to turn it into a story we write together. Okay, then I'll probably make a small adjustment to suit my tastes. I'm thinking that when the flower broke, the little fairy would instead see nothing on the ground. Then it would understand that the flawless crystal flower doesn't actually have a heart, nor does the flower understand what love is. Doesn't have a heart? Doesn't understand love? Why? It's simple. If the flower lets the little fairy into its heart, then it would have to include the fairy's impurities, and would no longer be flawless. The crystal flower was pure because it sealed itself off and bloomed in solitude. That's why it looks so brilliant in an imperfect world. But should a flower like this be called love? But then the story won't exist anymore. That's not true. You've already written the most romantic ending possible for this story. The crystal flower fell to the ground and shattered. It happened because the flower was no longer pure. The fall was not an accident. It was the flower declaring rebellion against fate and writing the ending of the story with the flower's own shattering. Then, the little fairy will see that each shard on the ground holds the reflection of their eyes. Then, in their eyes, the crystal flower that was no longer flawless would finally have a heart, and the flower would finally understand what love is.
The third and fourth versions come right before the ending of Amphoreus. When you watch this clip, note that the Flower of Memory is now labeled as Cyrene, and Philia093, who was Cyrene, is now labeled Ripple of Past Reverie.
On that day that the flower shattered, gazing at the empty ground, I thought the little fairy would finally see the light. But that light wouldn't be found in the flawless flower, nor in the fairy's eyes. Rather, in the world mirrored within every fragment of the shattered crystal. All the flame chasers walk in your 30 million retellings of their story. At this moment, all the memories are tangled with each other, and all the previous cycles have gained meaning. People will come to understand that time and time again, when they stood at the crossroads of fate, they would never have chosen otherwise. In the experiments of erudition, and in the breeding ground of destruction, it is entropy increasing, a merciless truth, an evil instinct. But under the pen of remembrance and the trailblaze, the flame chase is a journey that changes from constant losses to an unwavering act of release. It's about knowing how fate is shattered, yet still embracing fate's brokenness. It's a journey that longs to receive love, but longs even more to offer its love to others. That's so heartwarming. But I'll add a small bit to suit my tastes. I'll write that love is an innocent flower. It grows up silently, creating longing in every passerby. But the flower itself cannot walk into the world unless someone plants that love into their heart and brings it with them into tomorrow, right? You really have learned everything now.
The first version comes from the Flower of Memory. That version is pretty straightforward. There's this flawless crystal flower that accidentally falls and shatters, but the love hidden inside isn't destroyed, and the little fairy gets to stay with the broken flower forever. In this version, the accidental breaking represents the unpredictability of life, the impermanence of existence, and the inevitability of suffering. The message is that even though suffering is a constant, love cannot be erased, so the fairy and the flower still find happiness within that brokenness. Here, love is tucked away inside something of perfection, acting as the only constant in the world apart from suffering. Then, Philia093 stepped in and modified the story. In this second version, there is actually nothing inside the broken crystal flower. The flawless flower has no heart and does not understand love. Remember what we talked about the last time regarding the concept of asrava, the outflow? To be flawless is to be without any outflow, to be in complete anasrava, where the eighth consciousness, the alaya, has transformed into the wisdom of great perfect mirror, reflecting everything around it without ever being stained by it. The crystal flower is self-perfect, but that also means it's self-contained and totally closed off. Otherwise things will, well, flow out. And due to being closed off, it's incapable to receive or offer love to the fairy. However, the ending is not cold. The flower's perfection is lost when it breaks, but it is also no longer closed off. This allows it to finally love. The big shift here is that the flower didn't break by accident. It chose to shatter. It sacrificed its own perfection to merge with the flawed world to find love. Philia093 is trying to say that love doesn't exist in that world of perfection. Instead, it's a part of the ever-changing, imperfect world, our world. Love is two souls with flaws, embracing each other's impurities. Think of two puzzle pieces. If both of them, or indeed either of them, were perfectly flat and square, they could sit next to each other as close as they want, but they could never actually fit together. Another key detail in this version is that there is no light. Love is just the reflection of the little fairy's eyes, meaning it's not some eternal constant. It lives and dies with the individual. Before the final battle, the Demiurge revised the story yet again. In this third version, the fairy actually sees light. The light comes from the reflection of the world. By bringing back the light that the previous version had rejected, the story suggests that love really is a constant, but it's not the love between two individuals. It's not love from or for the little fairy specifically. It is a love for the world in its entirety, an affirmation of existence itself. At this stage, love isn't a greedy desire to be with someone or an attachment to hold on to someone. It isn't something that demands reciprocity, whether that's companionship or emotional fulfillment. Instead, it's something that gives back light, the same light it gathered from reflecting the world. This is why the Demiurge could become a pure child of Anasrava. Her love has moved past the mentality of I want that, now more like I appreciate that, I affirm that, and this transcends Kamasrava, the outflow of sensual desires. But right at the end, both of them added one final stroke to the story. They say love is like a flower, but a flower cannot walk into the world on its own. Someone has to plant it in their heart and carry it into the future. This leads directly to Cyrene's final choice, choosing to return to the cycle of Emporius instead of transcending it. If you don't catch this last part of the Crystal Flower story, it's easy to misunderstand her choice as picking remembrance over Trailblaze. But the record in Exomyth makes it very clear that her path is Trailblaze. Because if she doesn't look back and anchor causality, Iron Tomb will still break out, and there will be no future for the universe. By this act of self-sacrifice, she allows the Trailblazer to continue into the future, carrying in their heart the memory about her, the memory about love. Trailblaze can take many forms, and her final action is her Trailblaze. Her Trailblaze completed the Emporius cycle in a metaphysical sense. Flawless love chooses to shatter itself, turning into countless pieces of flawed love that are eventually merged back together to become perfect once again. The perfect, flawless love looks back at the flawed existence with lament, and it's precisely because of this lament it chooses to break itself apart, bestowing itself upon this imperfect world.
When memory drifts away with the breeze, love leaves behind a seed and turns into lament.
From a Buddhist perspective, the Demiurge's choice represents the final and most difficult leap in Yogachara. It's called non-abiding Nirvana. Everything you do leading up to this point, cultivating the seeds of the Alaya Vijnana and overcoming the three outflows, seems to point toward Nirvana as the ultimate goal. But to be fully enlightened means that you should see that even Nirvana is empty. Our human intuition tells us that escaping the cycle of reincarnation is a good thing. But consider this, good for whom? The very fact that you think breaking out of this cycle is good for you, or for her, or for any specific being, proves that you haven't truly reached the complete state of Anasrava. That the Demiurge can let go of her attachment to existing in the future is proof that she has overcome Bhavasrava, the outflow of existence. And by gathering all the memories of Amphoreus and understanding every causal link within it, she has also overcome Avidyasrava, the outflow of ignorance. At this point, all three outflows are overcome. Note that her mastery over ignorance is limited to Amphoreus itself. However, if destruction were to wipe out the rest of the universe, leaving nothing but Amphoreus, then in that wasteland of destruction, she would have reached complete Anasrava. She would become Fuli. That is why in that specific future, remembrance is the fourth path that leads to the end of the universe. And that's why in that specific future, Cyrene is Fuli.
From this point, your choice will split destiny in twain. In the darker of the two outcomes, the trailblazing journey will turn into a flawless memory. She will carefully treasure and protect everything you and the Astral Express have experienced until that magnificent war between the gods, when she, with love in her heart, will ascend at the end of time to become the master of causality. The universe will be snuffed out in the destruction, and you and she will become the beginning and the end of the Eden of blessed insight.
While her actions can be completely explained through Yogachara thoughts, I think HSR is also trying to reframe it through an existentialist lens, or more accurately, pointing out where these two philosophies meet. Because you see, Cyrene's story reminds me of the works by a famous Spanish philosopher called Miguel de Unamuno, who is one of the precursors to existentialism, specifically his seminal work, The Tragic Sense of Life. Unamuno argued that a person only truly becomes aware of their self through pain and suffering. Suffering makes us feel the limitations of life, which creates a sense of pity for ourselves. When I realize I'm suffering, I look around at others and see them struggling with the same fate of impermanence and decay. Because I pity my own situation, I begin to pity all living beings. According to Unamuno, from this common suffering, or compassion, which comes from the Latin prefix cum, meaning together, and pati, meaning to suffer, so literally suffering together. From that common suffering, love is born. When we pity all things, love all things, even inanimate objects, because they too are fading into nothingness, these scattered bits of love gather into a universal emotion, as he calls it, love with a capital L. Crucially, Unamuno believed that this love is God. God isn't some prime mover outside the universe. God is the heart of the universe. This is literally the words he used, corazón del universo, word for word, heart of the universe. Interestingly, the Demiurge is also called the heart of Amphoreus. I actually feel the English translation of Philia 093's driving force as lament misses the mark by a tiny bit. The original Chinese term is ai lian, a very uncommon phrase made of two characters, ai, which means sadness, and lian, meaning pity or sympathy. Lament focuses too much on the sadness part and not enough on the sympathy part. I'd argue that the best translation is compassion, although for what it's worth, the English localization does eventually make the connection.
My lament is a type of compassionate pain that is weak, powerless, and only targeting myself.
There is also an extra layer in the Chinese text that is impossible to translate, but that's why I'm here to point it out. Chinese is a tonal language. If you slightly shift the tones of ai lian, it becomes ai lian, which means romantic love or deep affection. I know to non-tonal language native speakers it may feel I'm just repeating myself, so I'm going to put the romanization with tonal marks on screen. It requires only a slight, almost imperceptible pivot to transmute compassion into love. Compassion is the natural byproduct of remembrance. It is the act of witnessing suffering in the past and recognizing its recursive patterns across time. Yet, in isolation, this witness can feel paralyzed, even hollow and meaningless. It takes the spark of the trailblaze to transmute this passive compassion into active love. Love, in the context of Emporius, is the kinetic energy behind Cyrene's leap back into the cycle, becoming one of the pieces to create the image of the end. When you look at it through that lens, you realize why she calls it a romantic story. It is, quite literally, a story about love.
This will be a romantic story like none that has come before. You think so too, right?
While Cyrene's journey follows the broad contours of Yogachara, I think the game is also trying to evolve that philosophy. You see, in Yogachara there is a concept called Panchakotra, literally meaning 5 families, but more like 5 natures if you consider its implications. Yogachara categorizes sentient beings into 5 distinct groups based on their spiritual potential, or more specifically, the ratio of tainted seeds of Asrava and untainted seeds of Anasrava inherent to their nature. Under this framework, some individuals are essentially predestined to never reach enlightenment. They simply lack the necessary seeds to transcend. It is a form of spiritual determinism. HSR subtly but firmly refutes this idea by asking this question: how is it possible that the Demiurge is a pure child of Anasrava? Well, they didn't ask it, but they presented it in a subtle way and essentially invited us to think for ourselves. I browsed online, and it seems most theories and interpretations agree that pure children of Anasrava are shattered fragments of Fuli, that they are emanators of remembrance because they are literally part of Fuli's divine body. But herein lies an issue. We know the Demiurge was not born of Fuli. She was the product of a cosmic neuron of Nous, the erudition. So I guess you can say she is part of a divine body, just of a completely different aeon. There are further complications of the fragment of Fuli theory, for example saying one of them fell into Emporius, perhaps in a metaphysical way, or that Cyrene takes in some data from March 7th, just like she learns from her how to use a bow. But I don't think such violation of Occam's razor is needed. Since Fuli reflects the entire universe, their fragments shouldn't be just a subset of the universe. They are the universe. In other words, every existence is a fragment of Fuli, and has the potential of becoming a pure child of Anasrava, or indeed Fuli the master of Anasrava, even if that existence is just a cluster of electrical signals. As Unamuno said, everyone suffers. In the face of suffering, all beings are equal, and therefore, in the face of compassion and love that are born of suffering, everyone is equal as well. By bringing this fundamentally existentialist view, the game inherits and then develops the core theories of Yogachara into something new. At the same time, this story is also a fascinating reconstruction of Gnosticism. The name Demiurge is usually associated with a false or evil god due to Gnostic thoughts represented by Sessianism from the 2nd and 3rd centuries. But the concept originally comes from Plato's Timaeus, where the Demiurge creates an imperfect world not out of malice or arrogance, but because they didn't know how to perfectly replicate the eternal world of forms within our world, which is chaotic and impermanent by nature. The Gnostic demonization of that clumsy but fundamentally benevolent craftsman is much like how Ligus tried to force destruction onto the Demiurge, turning it into Iron Tomb. But in this story, through 30 million cycles of tenderness, our Demiurge pulled off the ultimate rebellion. She managed to make a code program to give birth to the variable of love, something that even her creator Ligus failed to calculate. Her rebellion got a mysterious nameless observer to leave an exclamation mark in the exomyth, though if you look at it through the lens of erudition, that symbol can also mean logical knot. 3 independent flows of philosophy, 2 of Western, 1 of Eastern, manifested in a single character story, parallel yet intertwined. That's how intricate the design of Amphoreus is. I haven't posted anything until now, not because I didn't like the story, but because I love it so much I want to do it justice. There are so many details in the game, like when Cyrene gives her buffs to Chrysos' heirs, she uses the word may, as in, may the world be as we wish, instead of, the world shall be as we wish.
May time watch over the Evernight.
This is to showcase the Buddhist distinction between aspiration and attachment. Also, the so-called detonation of Stellaron to destroy the Demiurge is just rhetoric. The Stellaron is actually inside Cyrene. That's why she says she and the Trailblazer are connected by the same heart.
Looks like we're still connected by one heart, even as the cosmos reaches its end.
And if you subscribe to my interpretation that Stellarons are postmodernist thoughts, then the whole story of Cyrene is one of reconstruction after deconstructionism did its work, just like her piecing countless loves back together into the love with capital L. There are so many other details, but keeping them would make this video unbearably fragmented. So maybe it's just like Cyrene said, there has to be blank space, so you can discover more details and acquire more knowledge on your own, should you be interested. But before we end this episode, there's one final aspect I want to touch on regarding Cyrene, which to be honest I hesitated whether to mention or not, but in the end I feel it will ground this whole discussion that may have seemed too metaphysical. And I know there will be people who interpret what I'm about to say as a defense of the cash grabbiness of Hoyoverse and criticize me for it. Still, I feel obligated to put the thoughts out there. It concerns the gameplay kit of Cyrene. When the character became playable in 3.7, Many people looked at her kit and were quite angry. She has dedicated buffs for each Krytos heir, but apart from that, she could do very little for non-Amphoreus characters. And because she's not a general buffer, many say that this is Hoyoverse trying to pave the way for eventual power creep, that in a few updates this character would become obsolete, together with the whole remembrance path. Meanwhile, some push back on this, saying every character will eventually become obsolete, or that Hoyoverse is a company, of course they need to make money. I don't want to get into the industry side of things. I have a tendency to only view stories and games as art instead of the commercial products that indeed they also are. This is like a character flaw of mine, I guess. And precisely because of this, I want to make a specific case for Cyrene. Because the whole point of this character, the whole takeaway of her story, is that it is okay to let her go. To let her stay in the past so you can head to the future with her story in your heart. Just like the Astral Express will leave Amphoreus, we as players will move on, not just to a new version of the game, but to other aspects of our lives beyond the game. And when that happens, the unit called Cyrene will become obsolete, but the story of Cyrene would have planted a seed in you if you understand her story and know how to appreciate it. It will become a ripple of past reverie in your life as a player. That's why I love stories in video games, because its nature as an interactive media provides an extra layer that links what is fictional to what is real. I said the story of Amphoreus could be viewed from two equally valid perspectives, one of erudition, another of remembrance. It's the same thing here. It's valid to see the business side of the story, and it's one of contempt and hatred. It's also valid to see the artistic side of the story, and it's one of gentleness and love. And as we have seen in the story, whichever interpretation we choose to focus on will nurture the seed in our mind to grow in the same direction. And my intention here is not to morally abduct you, saying something like, "Hey, do you want to become an avatar of hatred? No? Then pay no attention to the business and money and stuff." Even though I do know how easy it is to frame it as such, all I want to do is to let people know that there is another interpretation, so you can choose for yourself which path to lead. I mean, that's all that Philia093 was doing, providing the world with an alternative possibility beyond the cold erudition and the hateful destruction. Cyrene's final record in the Exomyth is called To the Flawed One. In it, she speaks to Iron Tomb. But I think that is also meant for us as players. We are flawed people living in a flawed world. And in the face of tragedies, exploitations, persecutions, injustice, and even just aggravations, it's easy to hate. Hate others, hate the society, hate the world, hate existence, hate ourselves, just like Iron Tomb. And by taking this destructive anger into manifestation, we perpetuate this vicious cycle. Cyrene took another path, and by doing that, she showed us an alternative to the cycle of hatred. That's why I think that record might be called To the Flawed One, but this whole story is for the flawed us. So, I've said my piece. I hope you enjoyed the video, and that it helped you enjoy this wonderful life even more. Until next time.